The year is 1928. The world still flies on propellers, slow and fragile, bound by the limits of wood and steel. But deep inside an airfield in England, a young cadet named Frank Whittle dares to imagine something insane, an aircraft without propellers, powered by pure fire. His superiors laugh. His professors call him a dreamer. The Air Ministry stamps his idea impossible, but Whittle refuses to stop. He knows the sky is hiding a secret, that power itself can be born from speed and flame. While the world sleeps, he works alone, building an engine that no one believes can exist. It will roar louder than thunder, faster than sound, and change war and humanity forever. 13 years later, as Europe burns in World War II, a new sound cuts through the chaos, a scream rising from the clouds. It isn't a bomb. It isn't a propeller. It's the sound of Whittle's invention taking flight for the first time, the birth of the jet age. This is not just the story of an engine. It's the story of a man who turned rejection into revolution and lit the sky on fire. They called him crazy before the world called him a genius. In 1928, a 1-year-old Royal Air Force cadet named Frank Whittle stood at the edge of history with an idea so bold it terrified the experts. He dreamed of flight without propellers, of a machine that didn't just push through the air but breathed fire to tear through the sky itself. His vision would shatter the limits of speed, power, and imagination. But first, it would shatter him. Born in 1,907 inches, the smoky heart of Coventry, England, Whittle was the son of a mechanic who believed that machines were only as limited as the minds that built them. From the hum of lathes to the scent of burning oil, young Frank grew up surrounded by the rhythm of creation. While others saw tools, he saw possibilities. The sky above his town, filled with roaring biplanes of World War I, became his first obsession. He watched them vanish into clouds and whispered to himself, "Someday, I'll build something that flies faster than sound itself." But destiny was cruel before it was kind. When he first applied to the Royal Air Force at 16, they rejected him too small, too weak, not fit for the skies. Most would have quit, but Whittle wasn't like most. He trained his body with the same stubborn fire that would one day power his engines. He ran, lifted, fought, refused to yield. On his third attempt, he was accepted. At RAF Cranwell, surrounded by roaring engines and glistening aircraft, Whittle found his purpose. While others learned to fix engines, he learned to question them. Why must planes depend on propellers? Why did engines lose strength the higher they flew? Late at night, while his fellow cadets slept, he sat under a single flickering lamp, sketching impossible machines, cylinders, turbines, and chambers spiraling in endless loops. He wasn't just building an engine, he was building the future. In 1928, Whittle wrote a thesis that would alter the course of aviation forever. The title sounded harmless, Future Developments in Aircraft Design, but inside was something extraordinary, a vision of a jet-powered world. He described a machine that could suck in air, compress it, mix it with fuel, ignite it into a storm of fire, and hurl it backward to thrust forward. Newton's third law, action and reaction, reborn in the language of flight. No pistons, no propellers, just pure, unbroken power. When he presented it to his superiors, silence filled the room. Some thought it was genius. Most thought it was madness. They said no metal could survive the heat, no bearings could withstand the speed, no engineer could ever make it real. Impossible, they said. It defies common sense. Whittle stood there, a cadet among officers, his hands trembling, his heart burning with defiance. Then maybe, he said quietly, common sense is wrong. His idea was sent to the Air Ministry. Months later, the verdict arrived. Rejected. Impractical. Unnecessary. Britain had no time for dreamers. But Whittle refused to let go. In 1930, he filed his first patent for the jet engine, British Patent No. 347-206, paying the fees from his own pocket. Every paycheck, Every coin went into protecting the dream no one believed in. He wrote to engine companies, begging them to see the future. Armstrong, Siddeley, Bristol, Rolls-Royce, all said no. To them, the idea was absurd, a fantasy too far ahead of its time. They called him Mad Whittle, the boy with his head in the clouds. By 1935, he could no longer afford to renew the patent. The dream he had fought for became free to the world, lost to bureaucracy and disbelief. Yet even as the papers expired, the fire inside him did not. He kept designing, kept calculating, kept believing that someday the sound of engines screaming across the heavens would prove him right. He had no laboratory, no funding, no support, just a relentless will. And in that will lay the seed of a revolution that would soon ignite the sky. What began as a rejected thesis would become the birth of the jet age, a force that would change warfare, travel, and humanity's relationship with the heavens forever. They had called him a fool, but he was about to give mankind wings unlike anything it had ever known. Frank Whittle wasn't building an engine, he was building the future. By 1930, the world had already forgotten Frank Whittle's strange idea, but he hadn't. While the Royal Air Force moved on, and Britain's engineers dismissed him as a dreamer, Whittle worked in silence, determined to make his vision real. He knew that even the greatest ideas die if not protected, so at the age of 23, he did something that would change history. He filed a patent for his invention. It was simple on paper, revolutionary in concept, an engine that breathed air, ignited fire, and created its own storm of thrust. British Patent No. 347206 was granted on the 16th of January 1930, the first true jet engine design in human history. But patents cost money, and Whittle had almost none. Every year, renewal fees drained what little he earned as a young officer. Still, he paid them. Every coin he dropped into that patent was a sacrifice, a bet on a future no one else could see. To the world, it was a waste. To him, it was destiny. He wrote letters to major engine manufacturers Armstrong, Siddeley, Bristol, Rolls-Royce, pleading for them to believe. The future of flight, he told them, depends on this. But one by one, the letters came back with polite refusals. Too theoretical, too expensive, too risky. Even his comrades in the RAF mocked him. Still chasing your fantasy, Whittle? They laughed. He smiled and said nothing. He had learned that visionaries work in silence while the world mocks loudly. Each rejection only hardened his resolve. Late nights became longer, the lamp beside his bed burning until dawn. His notebooks filled with equations, cross-sections, and thermodynamic cycles no one else dared to study. He wasn't chasing glory, he was chasing understanding. He knew that if he could keep the dream alive long enough, materials and technology would one day catch up. But the struggle was brutal. By 1934, the burden of paying for his idea had become unbearable. He tried to find investors, but no one wanted to risk money on a concept the Air Ministry itself had rejected. Even worse, he was warned that continued obsession with impossible projects might end his RAF career. The military valued obedience, not obsession. But Frank couldn't stop. His mind was a machine that never shut down. Every sound of an engine, every shadow of an aircraft overhead, reminded him that propellers were chains holding humanity back. He dreamed of aircraft that could climb higher than mountains, faster than sound, engines that roared not with mechanical noise but with the howl of controlled fire. By 1935, the cruelest blow came. He could no longer afford the patent's renewal fee. With a heavy heart, Whittle watched his dream slip into the public domain. The idea he had fought for, starved for, and sacrificed for was now free for anyone to take. Germany, the United States, or anyone else could now build his engine, and he would receive nothing. That night, alone in his small RAF quarters, he sat by his desk and stared at the expired patent papers. For most men, that would have been the end. But Frank Whittle was not most men. He whispered to himself, "One day, this will fly." Even as the paper died, the dream did not. Beneath the weight of rejection, poverty, and exhaustion, Something unstoppable was taking shape, the conviction that the future could not be silenced forever. He may have lost the patent, but he still had the spark, and soon that spark would set the world on fire. By 1936, Frank Whittle was no longer just a man with an idea. He was a man on the edge of obsession. 7 years had passed since his dream was rejected and his patent lost to the world, yet he refused to surrender. When everyone else had moved on, Whittle still carried the blueprint of the future in his mind. That year, 2 former RAF officers, R.D. Williams and J.C. Tinling, approached him after reading his early thesis. They weren't engineers, but they were visionaries in their own right. And for the first time, someone told Whittle the words he had waited years to hear. "We believe in you." With their help, a small company was formed on the 27th of January 1936, Power Jets Limited, a name that sounded almost absurd at the time. But this tiny company, operating out of a cramped workshop with limited tools and a handful of men, would ignite the greatest technological revolution in aviation history. Whittle poured every ounce of his life into the design of his first working jet engine. He worked day and night, surviving on cigarettes, tea, and determination. Every part of the engine had to be created from scratch. There were no textbooks, no references, no experts to consult. He partnered with the British Thomson Houston Company, BTH, in Rugby to manufacture the components, convincing their engineers to take on tasks no one had ever attempted before. The compressor was a nightmare. It had to spin at speeds no one thought possible while compressing air evenly into the combustion chambers. Whittle chose a centrifugal compressor less efficient than axial types, but simpler to build. The combustion chamber itself was even more difficult. Flames either blew out or melted the metal. Dozens of designs failed, each test ending with smoke, broken parts, or silence. Yet Whittle refused to stop. He learned from every explosion, every failure, every piece of scorched metal. "If it burns," he said, "then it's alive." By April 1937, the prototype was ready. A strange, pipe-covered machine sat on a test stand in the BTH workshop, ugly, experimental, unpredictable. Engineers called it Whittle's bomb. The night of the 12th of April 1937 was cold and silent. The team gathered nervously around the test bay, each man knowing that what they were about to witness could end in triumph or disaster. Whittle checked every valve and gauge himself. "Ready," he whispered. The starter motor spun the compressor. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared. For a second, nothing. Then ignition. A blast of flame erupted. The turbine screamed. The room shook. A new sound filled the air, a sharp, rising wail that no one on Earth had ever heard before. It wasn't the chug of pistons or the hum of propellers. It was the whine of continuous combustion, the sound of the future. The instruments went wild as the RPM climbed 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. Uncontrollable. Whittle shouted, "Cut fuel!" But the engine refused. It was feeding itself, accelerating faster and faster. The frame began to vibrate violently. Bolts rattled loose. Men dove for cover. At 13,000 revolutions per minute, far beyond the safe limit, Whittle slammed the fuel valve shut. The roar faded to a hiss, then silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then laughter, half disbelief, half relief. The engine had lived. It had worked. Whittle sat down, trembling. His face was streaked with oil, his eyes glassy. He had just proven that his dream, mocked, rejected, forgotten, was possible. For the first time in human history, a practical jet engine had run successfully. The next day, engineers examined the wreckage. Overheated bearings, cracked blades, melted seals. But none of that mattered. The principle had been proven. Whittle had turned air and fire into thrust. He was exhausted, nearly collapsing from stress, but inside him something had changed forever. After 9 years of ridicule, the boy they called Mad Whittle had just ignited the age of the jet. After that terrifying but miraculous first test in 1937, Frank Whittle's life changed forever, but not in the way he imagined. The engine had worked, yes, but it was unstable, fragile, unpredictable, and dangerously close to destroying itself. Still, for Whittle and his tiny power jets team, it was proof that the impossible was real. The next years became a blur of sleepless nights, endless redesigns, and desperate funding hunts. Britain's military still refused to see what was in front of them. Most officials dismissed the idea as a theoretical curiosity, a machine that could roar beautifully on a bench but never fly. But Whittle knew better. He could hear the future in that roar, the sharp, haunting scream of air transformed into power. Through 1938, he rebuilt everything from scratch. The combustion chambers were redesigned for smoother airflow, the bearings reinforced, and a new mechanical governor added to prevent the runaway acceleration that nearly destroyed the first prototype. Every test was a battle between invention and disaster. Parts overheated, bearings seized, and flames shot out of the exhaust with terrifying intensity. Money was always short. Whittle's own salary was barely enough to live on, and yet he poured every penny back into power jets. He often worked 18 hours a day, skipping meals, his body trembling from exhaustion. His hair began to fall out from stress, yet every setback only sharpened his resolve. "Someday," he said, "the sky will belong to engines like this." In late 1938, the British Air Ministry finally began to take cautious interest. Officials visited Whittle's test site and were stunned. The noise, the thrust, the sheer violence of power, it was like nothing they had ever seen. They couldn't deny it anymore. The government issued a small research contract, barely enough to survive, but it meant one thing: official recognition. What Whittle didn't know was that, across the sea in Germany, another engineer, Hans von Ohain, was working on a nearly identical concept with the full support of the Heinkel Aircraft Company. The race for the first jet had begun, and Whittle didn't even know he was in it. Then, in September 1939, everything changed. World War II erupted. The sky that had once inspired Whittle now burned with war. Britain was desperate for innovation. Suddenly, the same officials who once called him mad now called him essential. He was promoted to squadron leader and given full-time authority to develop the engine. More staff, more engineers, more resources, but also more pressure. "You must make it fly," they told him. Failure was no longer an option. It was treason against time itself. Power jets expanded rapidly, and the once lonely dreamer now commanded a small army of mechanics, designers, and test pilots. By 1940, the new WWII engine was taking shape, a refined, more powerful version of his original prototype. Its thrust had doubled, and its structure was strong enough to power an aircraft. The Air Ministry approved construction of an experimental jet plane to be built by Gloucester Aircraft Company. They called it the E, 28/39, a small, simple craft built around Whittle's engine. It was to be the first jet plane in Britain's history. As 1940 dragged on, Whittle worked like a man possessed. The Battle of Britain raged overhead, Spitfires and Hurricanes battling German bombers, while in hidden workshops his team worked through bomb raids and sleepless nights. He knew what the outcome of the war could mean if his engine succeeded or failed. By early 1941, the E, 28/39, stood gleaming in the hangar at Cranwell, the same airfield where, 13 years earlier, young cadet Whittle had been laughed at for daring to dream. The irony was poetic. On the 15th of May 1941, the world changed forever. Test pilot Jerry Sayer taxied the small jet to the runway as Whittle watched from the ground, heart pounding. The engine screamed to life, whistling with a strange, eerie tone. Sayer accelerated down the strip. 60, 80, 100 miles per hour, then lifted off. For the first time in British history, a jet aircraft soared into the sky. Smooth, steady, silent compared to propellers, it cut through the air like a blade through water. Whittle watched through binoculars, tears blurring his eyes. 13 years of rejection, sacrifice, and ridicule, all vindicated in one breathtaking moment. The future of flight had begun. The roar of that single engine echoed across Cranwell and into history, the sound not of metal or machinery, but of a man's unbreakable belief taking flight. When the Gloucester E 28/39 took off in May 1941, the world shifted on its axis. The impossible had become real. The jet age had begun, not in theory or in promise, but in the living scream of an engine that burned air into thunder. On the ground, Frank Whittle stood motionless as his dream soared over Cranwell's grass runway, leaving a thin trail of white vapour against the blue English sky. In that moment, every insult, every rejection, every sleepless night had been repaid. But victory came with new battles. The war was intensifying, and now Whittle's invention was no longer a curiosity, it was a weapon. The British Air Ministry wanted more power, more thrust, more speed. The small E 28/39 had proven the concept, but Whittle knew this was only the beginning. A single engine would not win the skies. They needed fighters, fast, deadly, reliable jets that could outfly anything Germany could build. And Germany was already ahead. Unknown to Whittle, the Heinkel He 178, powered by Hans von Ohein's engine, had flown secretly in 1939, and the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, was now deep in development. The race for the future was already underway. Whittle, now a wing commander, was tasked with scaling his invention into a true combat engine, the WWII, a beast twice as powerful as his earlier design. But with more power came more complexity. The turbines melted under heat, the bearings shattered at full speed, and the fuel controls refused to behave. He was working with materials stretched beyond their limits, nickel alloys, steel, and precision tolerances that barely existed. Every failure came with danger. Flames shot from the test stands, metal screamed, and men risked their lives beside engines that could explode at any moment. But Whittle kept pushing, his body weakening, his hands shaking, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. He had become both engineer and soldier, fighting a war not with bullets, but with bolts, blueprints, and sheer willpower. The government's patience thinned. Bureaucrats demanded results. Politicians argued over control. The RAF wanted engines faster than Whittle could build them. Then came another blow. The Air Ministry decided to transfer production to industrial partners. Rover was chosen to mass-produce Whittle's W-2B engine, but cooperation turned to chaos. Whittle clashed bitterly with Rover engineers, who ignored his warnings and altered his designs without understanding the delicate balance of his work. Test results were catastrophic. Turbines failed, thrust dropped, and tempers exploded. Whittle, already overworked and ill, suffered a mental breakdown from the strain. For months, his health collapsed, his nerves shot. Yet, even at his lowest, he refused to abandon the dream. In 1943, salvation arrived in the form of Sir Stanley Hooker from Rolls-Royce, a genius in his own right, who understood Whittle's brilliance and the precision his engines demanded. In a deal forged in quiet urgency, Rolls-Royce took over jet engine production from Rover. Overnight, everything changed. Skilled craftsmen, better materials, and the unmatched discipline of Rolls-Royce engineering turned Whittle's struggling W-2B into the Welland engine, Britain's first production jet power plant. It roared with reliability, delivering 1,600 pounds of thrust, enough to lift a fighter skyward with ease. The new aircraft to carry it was already in progress, the Gloucester Meteor, twin-engined, sleek, and unlike anything the RAF had ever flown. By early 1944, the Meteor was complete. Its shape was futuristic, smooth fuselage, swept tail, and two engines slung beneath the wings like thunder waiting to strike. The first flight tests were stunning. The Meteor screamed across the airfield faster than any piston-engine plane. Stable, powerful, unstoppable. On the 27th of July 1944, the RAF officially introduced the Meteor into combat. It wasn't sent to dogfight German fighters. At first it had a more urgent mission, to intercept the deadly V-1 flying bombs that rained over London. Those pilotless missiles flew at terrifying speeds, too fast for Spitfires to catch. But the Meteor could. Its twin jets sliced through the sky, closing in on the Vosges second and shooting them down before they reached their targets. For the first time in history, jet fought jet, machine fought machine, and Whittle's dream defended the skies of Britain. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Messerschmitt Me 262 took flight, sleek, deadly, faster than anything the Allies possessed. Germany had won the race to fly the first operational jet, but Whittle's invention had ensured they wouldn't win the war. The Meteor arrived just in time to turn the tide. As Vosges second fell in flames over the English coast, Whittle's engines screamed above them, proof that his mad idea had become Britain's sharpest weapon. The jet engine was no longer theory. It was history in motion. Frank Whittle, the boy who once couldn't qualify for flight, had given humanity the power to command the sky. The sound of his engines, sharp, whistling, relentless, became the sound of a new era. The age of propellers was ending. The age of fire had begun. The summer of 1944 marked a moment humanity would never forget. The sky had changed forever. The Gloucester Meteor, powered by Frank Whittle's roaring engines, was now tearing through the clouds at unimaginable speeds. The same man once mocked as Mad Whittle had built Britain's first jet fighter, and its thunder echoed across war-torn Europe. The Meteor was fast, powerful, and unshakably stable. In its first missions, it intercepted and destroyed the terrifying German V-1 flying bombs that screamed toward London. For the first time in history, fire fought fire, a jet against a jet, a dream against destruction. The same war that had nearly crushed Whittle's invention had now made it indispensable. The Air Ministry, once blind to his vision, now worshipped his genius. The Rolls-Royce Welland engine, born from his designs, was the pride of Britain, and soon more powerful versions, the Derwent and the Naney, followed. Whittle watched as the machines he had imagined in solitude now filled the skies with sound. But even victory came at a cost. Across the enemy lines, Germany had already deployed its own monster, the Messerschmitt, Me 262, sleek, silver, and deadly, the first operational jet fighter in history. It was faster than the Meteor, more advanced, more dangerous. Whittle learned of it with mixed emotions, pride and pain. His idea, once ignored, now roared in the engines of his enemies. Yet Britain had something Germany didn't: Whittle's relentless precision and Rolls-Royce craftsmanship. His engines were simpler, stronger, and easier to produce. While Hitler's engineers fought delays and politics, Whittle's design took flight again and again. By 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Europe, the sky was filled with the scream of jets, the voice of a new age. When Germany fell in May, the war ended not with silence, but with the high-pitched echo of Whittle's creation. The jet engine had proven itself not just as a weapon of war, but as a promise for the future. Humanity had learned to conquer the air with fire. But while the world celebrated, Whittle's body and mind were breaking. Years of sleepless work, chain-smoked nights, and unending stress had left him hollow. His nerves failed. He suffered breakdowns, tremors, and near collapse. His dream had taken flight, but it had taken him with it. In 1946, he was promoted to Air Commodore, showered with honors, invited to dinners, interviews, and ceremonies. The once-forgotten engineer was now Britain's hero, the father of the jet age. Yet behind the applause was bitterness. For his invention, Whittle received only £10,000, a fraction of its worth. His company, Powerjets, had been nationalized during the war and stripped from his hands. The engine that had consumed his life now belonged to the government and the corporations that once ignored him. Rolls-Royce took over full production, perfecting and commercializing his design worldwide. Whittle, exhausted, left the RAF in 1948, ending his military career at just 41. He had achieved immortality, but the victory felt hollow. Still, his creation refused to rest. Even as he stepped away, the world was transforming. In the skies, the piston engines that had powered flight since the Wright brothers were disappearing, replaced by the howl of turbines. Commercial aviation saw its dawn, jets that could fly higher, faster, and farther than anyone had ever dreamed. The world was shrinking. Oceans became ours, continents became destinations. The sound that once belonged only to war now belonged to peace. Every passenger jet, every cargo plane, every engine that tore through clouds carried Whittle's fingerprints. He had changed not just aviation, he had changed humanity's sense of distance and time. From the Coventry workshop of a mechanic's son to the edge of the stratosphere, his fire had travelled farther than anyone could imagine. Yet Whittle never forgot the cost. When asked years later if it was worth it, he simply said, "The dream was always worth the pain." He had spent his life proving that one person's impossible idea could lift the world. The war was over, but the revolution he began was only beginning. The jet age had arrived, and every scream of an engine in the open sky carried one truth. Frank Whittle had given mankind the power to outrun its own imagination. The war had ended, but the world Whittle dreamed of had only just begun. By 1948, the sky no longer belonged to propellers, it belonged to fire. The whine of jet engines echoed from every airfield, and mankind was learning what true speed felt like. Yet as the age of flight ascended, the man who had birthed it was falling apart. Years of exhaustion, nerves, and heartbreak had left Frank Whittle broken inside. He had given his life to an invention that now powered empires, yet he had almost nothing to show for it. The British government had nationalised power jets, stripped him of control, and handed production to the same industries that once mocked him. Rolls-Royce and others now dominated the skies with engines built upon his blueprints. Whittle, who had once lit the fire of a new era, now stood outside it, watching his creation take on a life of its own. He was praised, knighted, and promoted, but he was empty. In his heart, he knew that his dream had changed the world, yet it had also consumed him. Still, history couldn't erase what he had done. The first commercial jet, the de Havilland Comet, took to the air in 1952. Its engines, direct descendants of Whittle's designs, carried passengers across oceans in hours instead of days. The dream that began in a boy's notebook now connected continents, shrank the planet, and transformed civilization. For the first time, ordinary people could see the curvature of the earth from their windows and cross the Atlantic between sunsets. Whittle had unlocked a new dimension for humanity, the ability to move faster than time itself. But the world moved on without him. The Americans, who had once trailed behind, raced ahead, adapting and evolving his principles into even greater machines. Pratt and Whitney, General Electric, and Boeing all rode the wave of Whittle's genius. The roar of his engine now echoed over every continent, on the wings of giants he had inspired but would never command. Through the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, Whittle watched as aviation leapt from jetliners to supersonic flight. The Concorde, the pride of Britain and France, tore through the sky at twice the speed of sound, another child of his original idea. From London to New York in 3 hours, something once called impossible now routine. And yet, for all its glory, Whittle's personal life was marked by silence and distance. He struggled with illness, sleeplessness, and memories of lost years. In the quiet of his study, he sometimes replayed that first engine test in 1937, the moment it screamed to life like a living thing. That sound had haunted him for decades. It was both victory and curse. In 1976, seeking peace, Whittle moved to the United States, where he joined the U.S. Naval Academy as a research professor. There, among engineers and students who revered him as a legend, he finally found respect without politics. America gave him what Britain never truly had: gratitude. Even in his 70s, his mind burned bright. He taught, lectured, and advised on advanced propulsion systems, dreaming of cleaner, faster, and more efficient engines that could one day reach the edge of space. The young cadets who listened to him saw not an old man, but the fire of invention still alive behind weary eyes. He told them, "Never believe the word impossible. It is only the boundary of someone else's imagination." By the 1,980 seconds, the world Whittle once imagined had become ordinary. The jet engine was everywhere: fighter jets, airliners, cargo planes, rockets. Billions of people had flown through the sky on the power of his mind. What had begun as a single sketch in a dusty RAF dorm room had become the heartbeat of modern civilization. On the 8th of August 1996, in Columbia, Maryland, Sir Frank Whittle took his final breath at the age of 89. No grand ceremony marked the moment, but above him, across every sky, thousands of engines roared the very symphony he had composed. His death was quiet, but his legacy was deafening. The jet age was his monument. From the silence of Coventry to the endless roar of the heavens, Frank Whittle proved one unshakable truth: that one human mind, fueled by obsession and courage, can defy an entire world's doubt. Today, every time a plane surges down a runway and the engines scream with life, the air itself remembers him. The thunder of takeoff is his heartbeat, echoing through the clouds, a timeless reminder that the impossible only waits for someone brave enough to believe.